So, good afternoon, everybody. I know that we are between you and lunch. That's always exciting. Just a little bit about myself. So, I've been in the industry in cybersecurity for close to 20 years now. Tarah and I used to work, I'm still in Symantec. We used to work in the same company. Super passionate about this topic. I mean, never in my 20 years of doing cybersecurity I would think that it's such front and center in terms of the discussion here. And I think just listening to your TED Talk session was really inspiring. I think it got, hopefully, a lot of light bulbs coming on in terms of what do we actually think about cybersecurity, and especially with artificial intelligence. Why don't you just take us a little bit in terms of, just go back a little bit in terms of history, where cybersecurity started, how in the past it was looked like, where it is right now, and where do you think we're going to go in the future with AI? Yeah.
Thanks for that, David. It really is a joy to be here with you again, sort of back on the old home team again. Yeah. Cybersecurity, I like to start thinking of these as two different things. Information security and cybersecurity have started to have two different meanings. And I think I'm very firmly rooted in information security. Cybersecurity has come to mean the protection of all data by any means, physical, human, digital, and information security, I think, has often had more to do with network security, user account protection, the more technical end of it. And so I think it's an important question to ask, where did cybersecurity originate? I think it came from a more holistic view of the need to protect people as opposed to the need to protect data. When we started having this realization, I think one of the reasons I was drawn to this industry is I'm a little strange. I think a lot of my colleagues are a little odd. We think about things differently. And to try to break systems and break into systems that other people have created often means that you need to think at a right angle to how they thought when they developed the system. There have been a lot of problems with law enforcement, frankly, with information security and cybersecurity over the last 2 to 3 decades. It's often difficult for people outside the field to understand the difference between trying to break into something to make it better and trying to break into something to steal things. Often, the only difference between the actions of someone who is a white hat hacker and a black hat hacker is just their intention. Whether or not they're trying to help people or hurt them, yet their technical activity is the same. That's often misunderstood. So I think as our industry has started to grow up, as we've started to realize that ours is an industry of service and one that's devoted to keeping people safe, we've started to break apart into specializations that it's become really helpful for people to understand how and what we're doing. One of those specializations is starting to become artificial intelligence in cybersecurity.
Yeah, that's right. And you're right. I mean, being in the industry, then that's actually interesting. How I got into the industry was trying to figure out how to break into systems. But that was a different part of my life. But yeah.
Is it, David?
Still, it is. It's a very different part. But I think with regards to see how the industry is kind of maturing, and even within for people like us in cyber, is now put front and center. With the business now, we're having business discussions in terms of how do you actually implement cybersecurity into the most innovative apps and applications out there. And AI always comes up, right? AI always comes up. So in your mind, what are some of the methods actually do we have in terms for AI to detect cyber? And the question is, we've always heard AI is used for good, right? You do robo-advisory and things like that, but what are some of the methods, just give the audience a sense of how do you actually use AI in a cybersecurity system itself?
So there are multiple methods for using artificial intelligence in cybersecurity. Some involve using AI adversarially in order to test systems. Some involve using it to attempt to defend systems. And then there are the external methods that are being used criminally. So if you are a company that is attempting to use artificial intelligence to defend your company, one of the things you might do is something that is actually a product I believe Symantec offers, and to be fair and non-denominational, other companies do as well, which are endpoint protection. One of the things that artificial intelligence is used for is to probabilistically determine the likelihood that something is a piece of malware. And that's done with matching and machine learning in the more advanced applications that exist out there. That's what we call defensive or blue team cybersecurity, information security. That's one of the major applications for AI inside a company. When you use AI adversarially, one of the things that you might want to do is attempt guessing. And guessing in this case is a very technical term that means trying to figure out the most likely people in a company based on doing a scraping of LinkedIn, cross-referencing that with any of the data breaches that have become publicly available, reusing passwords that users seem to have reused again and again, and then scripting an attack. And when I say scripting an attack, I mean using the information that we have gotten before on successful cyber attacks to, at scale, guess across multiple companies if we should wish to. Now that, of course, would hopefully be only if we were authorized to do so, but I can certainly tell you that the people that attacked the Indian financial institution in 2017 were not authorized to do so, and they used the kinds of data breaches that have been happening over the last decade to make those kinds of guesses. Adversarial AI is about predicting what a human would have done and getting better and training that algorithm to try to guess what we'll do. And it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be efficient enough to make money.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, now that you mentioned it, and I think that some of the motivations why you see data breaches actually happen now. Not only is it from a financial perspective that you sell the data breach, the data that you've got off in the underground market, but now you start to learn off this kind of data that you actually got off the breaches. That's an interesting thought to think about. And what about adversarial AI? I mean, do you actually, you talked about it a little bit about dark trace detecting that, but could you walk us a little bit through in terms of what was the actual attack or how it actually attacked the system using AI? Yeah.
So without obviously having access to the internal records of dark trace, one of the things I can say is very likely is something that I have actually done before in a different social media application, which is start matching people to their interests. When you create and train a machine learning algorithm, artificial intelligence is what we call the use of these kinds of machine learning algorithms in order to do something faster than people. Not smarter than people, but faster than people. One of the things you do is store the combination of interests and people and likely uses of that information. The best way to figure out what someone is like and what their likely passwords are is to get access to their Facebook data. Unfortunately, you don't have to work that hard to get a hold of a lot of the Facebook data that was released over the last couple of years, right? So that information is now out there and available for people. Machine learning is about making connections that a human being would have taken longer to make and drawing them faster, making a good guess about whether or not someone who is very interested in baking would want a coupon for silicone baking trays is the kind of thing that artificial intelligence is used for in advertising. You should be using it this way in financial technology, this kind of advising. It's also the exact same kind of data storage and prediction that's used to try to guess someone's password or replicate a financial transaction. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Good.
Yep, got it.
Yeah.
Let me just, I got quite a few questions coming in on the app, and I think some of them are interesting. Let's maybe pick one. Let me see. Okay. Well, this one, if AI goes rogue, what would we do? Would we be prepared to actually counter threats that may rise from it? Would AI go rogue, do you think? Yeah.
That's a great question. Can AI go rogue? Again, artificial intelligence isn't something that replaces people. It just makes what we do faster. That's the history of humanity, is creating tools that let us work faster and get more done. So it's less about AI going rogue and having intentionality, and more the unintended consequences of using it in an environment where we didn't understand where its boundaries were. Two good examples of releasing tools and technologies that we didn't understand the boundaries of would include NotPetya, which was, of course, a cyber attack versus Ukraine, and it escaped its boundaries, right? Shutting down global shipping, creating massive logistical delays, and without any doubt causing hundreds of millions of dollars of losses in global shipping, transportation, food spoilage. WannaCry is another wonderful example of it. Now, remember that we're talking here about ransomware, but this is ransomware that's taking advantage of a good guess about a system. It doesn't have to be right all the time, just enough that it'll spread with a network effect. When I think about artificial intelligence going rogue, as you say, I don't think about it necessarily having intentionality. I think about it having an unintended network effect. And if a tipping point is reached where enough systems are vulnerable to a specific attack, it can spread unintentionally. That's the thing that concerns me most about the way that we are developing these tools. Think of it as artificial intelligence as pollution, right?
I think my perspective on AI going rogue, and this I think begs the question is, just because we can, should we? Right? And a good example to all the ones that you mentioned was this whole thing around AI going rogue with deepfakes, right? We've actually seen attacks, and we've actually learned that using deepfakes, you can pretty much have a very accurate representation of your CEO's voice, and then play it back through the telephone, and then from there, authorize the transaction going out, right? So, and I think with cybersecurity, it's always, lack of a better word, cat and mouse, right? We are also learning what are the new ways of attacks coming in, and with AI, it's no different. We just need to know what kind of attacks are going to be coming up on AI, and then we're going to have to be dealing with it. Of course, on the good guys like us, we are definitely going to leverage the technology, right?
I'm flattered to be called one of the good guys.
Well, reformed, I guess.
My mom is very pleased right now.
Okay, another one actually, I think, and this perhaps would be, and it's kind of like trending up on that. How to start from scratch to assess the level of a cybersecurity coverage in a fintech organization? What are fundamental steps to start from?
This may be a less popular example in a conference so focused on innovation, but one of the issues that we have in cybersecurity is that the fundamentals are often not covered nearly as well as they should be. There are several fundamentals for personal security, like have different strong passwords held in a password manager, have a passcode on your phone, implement multi-factor authentication, obviously. And just in the same sort of way, there are several basics in a company that are often passed over in favor of buying shiny new tools. The single number one major thing that any company can do to prepare itself in terms of its information security stance and minimizing its attack surface is get your patching down to the smallest amount of time possible. When I say patching, what I mean is all of the systems, the business applications you use, the software you develop, the mobile applications you push out to the Play Store, to the App Store. When you have a security vulnerability reported in any of those applications, third party that you purchased or any you've developed in-house, I have seen patching cycles that are years long. I mean critical vulnerabilities that go unpatched because companies aren't sure how to patch them without breaking their production software. That single problem, that is the biggest problem in cybersecurity, in information security. That is the fundamental. It's eating your vegetables, it's exercising every single day, it's getting good sleep. It's not fun, but it is the basis for the health of your company's security. After that, you get to worry about the fancy stuff and the fun stuff. Get the patching cycle down to as short a time as possible.
All right, good. I mean, and I'll be having a workshop anyway later in the afternoon. I think we're going to talk a little bit more around this, and I guess to one level down in terms of what companies can actually do to kind of protect themselves in that sense. And starting from scratch, I mean, just looking at this for fintech organizations, do you think regulatory requirements play a role in terms of making sure the fintech orgs do make sure that their cyber systems are up to scratch, like what you said, right? Patching it and making sure that that happens. Yeah.
The regulatory environments are incredibly important. And ask me about the three internets in just a second, but hang on that one, because David and I are having this great conversation right now. The regulatory environment that fintech and mobile financial applications live in is incredibly important, but it's about compliance and not necessarily about security. In many companies, there is a big difference between what you're required to do and what's a good idea to do. Most of the time, what you're required to do is the minimum baseline for just existing and not getting sued or getting in trouble with the law. Security has more to do with trying to do the smart thing, the protective thing of your customers, for your customers. The regulatory environment and all of the associated regulations you must abide by should be considered just a baseline for what you should be doing to keep your customers and your transactions safe. Security is about taking that next step and not just trying to avoid problems, but actively trying to make your customers and transactions safer. Does that make sense? Good.
Yeah, which brings me to that point, and this is where I kind of saw you on the interview, that you talked about this concept of the three internets, right? Can you just walk us through that and what that effect or impact is like for fintech players? Because I mean, when I look at fintech players and the people outside, I'm sure they're not just thinking about just Malaysia. I mean, they're going to be talking about regionally and all that. But this concept that you talked about, the three internets, how is that going to impact? Yeah.
Around the world, I think the passage of GDPR in the European Union brought into sharp focus that companies around the world and products around the world do not treat people the same way based on where they're located in the world. GDPR was a massive wake-up call for American companies especially. US companies that had just gone after data as fast as they possibly can, something that's very common in the financial industry in the United States, found themselves totally unprepared for a world where someone could call them up and say, delete my data. Companies didn't know how to delete people's data. They'd never planned for it. They'd never added the technological hooks in to ensure that they could delete data. So a request could be made of a company in the US that collected financial data from a random person in the European Union who said, stop holding my data. And that US company would have to guarantee and demonstrate that they had deleted that person's data or face fines, problems selling their product in the EU. This was an incredible wake-up call. And the first reaction of most US companies on the implementation of GDPR wasn't to delete customer data. It was just to turn off website service to the European Union. They didn't know how to fix it, right? They didn't know how to delete data, so they opted instead to stop serving the product to the European Union until they could develop a product for the EU that would actually let them delete data. Note that that doesn't mean they actually started deleting the data of US citizens that wanted it, because that wasn't part of the US's regulatory climate. Now, what this means fundamentally is that the US started treating the European Union like another entire internet. We also are aware at this point of the Great Firewall of China. The internet works differently inside China. And this has led to a world where US companies, where European Union companies are treating China like an additional third jurisdiction for product service. This is a world where there are now three internets. There is the European Union, there is China, and there's the US and the rest of the world. I'm not sure whether or not the people in this room think it's a good idea that you are included with the US and the rest of the world in these internets, but this is a world where companies are developing three different versions of the same product, one which is much more able to have data deleted and protected for the European Union, one which is entirely visible to the Chinese government, and one which is as rapidly prototyped and sold in the US and the rest of the world as possible. Products are developing differently in three different internets now based on the regulatory environment and the demands of government regulators.
Yeah, that's absolutely interesting. I mean, the fact that, for a lot of tech players, they never really thought about, 3 different versions and think about regulatory requirements in terms of rolling out your app in those particular countries and what kind of regulatory requirements that kind of sit on it, right? And I think what you just spoke about kind of is food for thought, definitely, for sure, right? One question here. It's quite interesting. I think we became from that world as well. Is it easier to is it easier to create and protect cyber systems, or is it easier to hack into security systems? Your thoughts?
Okay.
Yeah.
It depends on what kind of person you are. It depends on what brings you joy. It's true. You're someone who loves to create things, or you're someone who loves to keep people safe, or both. I wake up every day liking to keep people safe and using my brain, which thinks differently than people who develop software products, to try to attack that software product. So for me, it's easier to think in terms of breaking into something than I'd rather break into the bank than build it. But I do that so that people who use that bank can feel safe. It brings me joy, and that's what makes it easy for me. So you build things in this room. You build companies and apps and ways for people to save and ways for people to talk to each other about anything, money, and transact business across the world. Does this bring you joy? Does it make you happy to do this? Good. I'm seeing nodding heads in here. That's what makes it easy for you. It's not about how hard the work is, it's about whether you love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think how I got into this was...
I want to know, how did you get into this?
Really? Okay. And this is an interesting, I hope it's an interesting story. So just like I think a lot of the fintech players here, back in the .com days, everybody was going .com, right? Now it's fintech and everything tech.
Blockchain.
Back then, yeah, I know. So back then was .com days, and like every young coming out, and we're starting a .com and all that, and code red hit, Slammer, code red hit, yeah. Wow. So back then, that was basically the worm to get hit. If it basically defaced your website and things like that, and that got me down this rabbit hole of what we call cybersecurity today. How did they actually break into systems? And I actually got down into that role, breaking into systems. And I think along the same lines, right? It's easier actually to break into systems, but it's actually a lot more fulfillment you get out of it in terms of actually making sure those systems are secure at the end of the day, right? And I think, no regrets, getting into this industry. I've got 2 young girls at home, and I'm just kind of worried, being a father myself, what the future looks like now with everything so tech-enabled, with all of us so digitally connected to the world. So I guess it's my responsibility to kind of make the world a little bit safer, and that's why I do this. Yeah. So thank you for that. I guess last question with AI. I think Terminator 3 is coming out soon. Yeah, I'm watching Terminator. I'm watching the recent one on Netflix right now, just to refresh. But what do you think?
I think it's
will robots?
Terminator 5 now.
Oh yeah, that's right. Will robots take over?
There were people writing opinion editorials in the New York Times about how a brand new technology was going to destroy the moral fiber of the youth, and it was going to wreck the global economy by making information too freely available. In 1860, 1870, when the telegraph was the new fear. The world's always going to be changing, and finding a way to break into systems and keep them safe is an honorable profession. Yeah. But am I worried about the robots taking over, about the next technology? I think the tools we create are a reflection of how we see the world. And if we create tools that are meant to help people, to assist disabled people, to translate, to provide carbon-free power, to get people around cities faster without pollution, that is a reflection of us. If we create tools of war, that's what they're going to be used for. So I'm less worried about the robots taking over and more working as hard as I can, and I hope everyone in this room is, to ensure that the people who are building those robots are doing it in a way to serve humanity instead of to harm it.
Absolutely. I mean, I absolutely agree. Yep. And I think with that, I hope cybersecurity is not all doom and gloom, and that final note on Tarah's was a silver lining in that sense. And I hope everybody enjoys lunch, talking about AI later.